Okay, I'm extremely excited to welcome alumni Dan Cox, who graduated in 2005 with an MFA in Visual Effects here at the Academy. Dan is currently a VFX supervisor working directly with James Cameron on the Avatar sequels at Weta Digital, and he has also worked for ILM and Sony Imageworks, among other noted companies. He holds an award from the Visual Effects Society for his work on Avatar. Welcome, Dan.
Hello.
So I'm going to start by letting the audience get to know your journey a little bit more. So can you start by telling us your journey from school into the industry and what you've done from the time you left school to now and how it was for you?
Gosh, that's a long process. I actually started out doing my undergrad back in '97, I guess, and I had no idea what I wanted to go into. It was early VFX. I lived in Tennessee, Northeast Tennessee, base of the Smoky Mountains. Went to East Tennessee State University, and ended up flunking out of college my sophomore year. Mainly because I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and I stopped going to classes. I came back my junior year and took one class in AutoCAD, and believe it or not, AutoCAD changed my life. There was something about it that I was like, I liked the digital aspect of it, and shortly after, I actually joined the visual effects program, and it was a very early days visual effects program back then in the late '90s. Some schools were popping up here, and there was SGI machines, if that tells you anything, And I ended up doing my undergrad degree, and didn't gain enough experience. Knew I didn't have enough to actually get a job. I was, like I said, at the base of the Smoky Mountains in Northeast Tennessee. There's no movie industry there. There's no anything, in terms of this kind of industry there, really. And so a friend of mine in the school as well, both decided to go to the Academy, and we looked at a couple of the other different schools, big ones on the East Coast, and just kind of decided that the Academy was the best place for us. From a cultural standpoint, for us, it was different, and the idea that it was in such close proximity to some of the major studios, was also very appealing. And the fact that some of those studios brought alumni over to teach courses was also extremely appealing, right? Because you felt like you weren't getting some person who had been out of the industry for 15 years and now they're just in academia, because you're going to get fresh off the basically all the brand new software, all the new techniques straight off from these people. So we decided to come out, and I started the first year and ended up meeting a bunch of new people. Only knew one person when I moved here, and started in the programs early, and you kind of end up meeting groups of people that that become your tight-knit friends, and slowly as you go through school too, you figure out who the other people are who are just into it, as much into it as you are. It's those people that are in the lab at 2 o'clock in the morning, just like you are. You kind of look around and it's consistent. It's the same people every time almost, and you become really close to these people. And just busted tail, did everything I could to learn this stuff as much as I could, at the same time as working part-time, going to school, to pay for my studio apartment on Nob Hill, kind of stuff that I was sharing with another guy at the time. It's like we're all crammed in a closet trying to make it work. And but it all paid off because it was, I guess, my second to last year. My friend had just actually was finishing his thesis, and I was working with him on a thesis project. And there was an instructor at the school at the time who was a former ILM artist, Doug Mcmillan, who's still in the industry, was doing a one-on-one with my friend Jason Fleming about a particular shot in his thesis, and I was allowed to help him with the effects on that. And so we meet up, and we got the call one day from the Academy saying, hey, there's this company, Giant Killer Robots, in the area that are looking for 2 TDs, and they called the school, so they didn't want to actually put the job out there for applications. They just wanted recommendations, and our 2 names were given by the school, and they said, show up on Monday, you've got a job interview. And so of course I didn't sleep for 2 days, and we showed up on Monday, and got the job, and it was a 6-week, 8-week gig or something, and ended up doing the work, and ended up getting hired afterwards. And I remember I was making the most money I'd ever made in my entire life, a whopping, $50,000 a year, kind of stuff, which is pennies if you're in San Francisco, right? But for a kid coming out of school, I was like, whoa, I'm rolling in it now, kind of stuff. So, but those 2 years that I worked at Giant Killer Robots was a master class in visual effects as well too, because it's just, you get so much great stuff out of school, and then once you actually get into the industry, and deadlines become more than just, hey, it's an assignment class that you've got to present, and you've got this deadline to work against. Your deadline is the shot delivers or doesn't, and there's real money involved in that with these studios, right? And so it's the stress level goes through the roof. I remember my very first day getting there, getting my desk, and somebody walks up and they say, hey, here's some tools, have a play with these today. We'll give you your shots assignment tomorrow, and you'll have about 2 weeks to turn around the effects for those shots. And they walk away. And it's just like, oh my God, I'm not ready for this, kind of stuff. And eventually it's like I told people before, it's like a train just going by, and all you can do is just reach out and grab on. It's going to be tough, but you'll pick it up. And so I worked there for 2 years. What's that?
I was just going to say, since you've left, we've developed a program called Studio X, where we try to mimic and mirror the industry, and the real deadlines, and you have that collaborative pipeline work. So you're really and it's helping to prepare people better for when they go on the job. But we didn't have that, but now we do.
Oh, it's a good thing, because it's a culture shock for sure. Yeah. And I got lucky. Giant Killer Robots was one of these companies. It was a mid-level company. It was great to work for, and eventually they ended up closing their doors. But we were very fortunate. About half the company went to PDI, and half the company went to ILM. And I was on the side that went to ILM, and did a project there, and then got whiff of, hey, James Cameron's back in the game after so much time since Titanic, and he was going to make this movie. And of course, me being a nerd, I'm like, I want to do this thing. Had no idea what the movie was. And so through a friend of a friend, got my resume down there, got hired, and moved to the South Pacific. And I didn't know anybody down there at the time. So that was interesting, but it was a life-changing experience, and ended up, I was going to do it for a year, and ended up staying down there for 3.5 to see the entire film out, and then a couple others after. And I got the opportunity to be bumped up to a CG supervisor on that project, which partnered up with a VFX Soup, and had a lot of responsibility. And it was just, again, every show you work on is a learning experience, because every single show you're coming up with new tools, new techniques. It's not just a matter of just cranking out shows all the time, especially at a company like Weta. Constant innovation is happening, right? And so on a show like this, it's just innovation on steroids, right? It's just like you've got a budget, you've got time, you've got a director that's into this stuff, and he wants to push the envelope, and you've got leadership at the studio that's just the best in the business, and it's just kind of the perfect storm for a movie like this to come out. And I ended up staying for about a year after the project ended, and came back to ILM and worked on a show there, bounced back down to help out on Apes in New Zealand, and came back to ILM, all because I was waiting on my wife to finish her degree for business school, and then ended up making LA home. And since I came here, I've worked for Sony. Then I left the industry for a short period to go to the video game side of stuff, where I was working on the cinematics team and supervising there at Blizzard Entertainment for about just shy of 5 years, and got to work on the Warcraft and Starcraft and Diablo and Heroes of the Storm, and eventually got to launch Overwatch. And then I got sucked back in. I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. I got sucked back into Avatar sequels about 4 years ago now, and I got the opportunity to be on set for the entire time. So all 4 years I've actually been on set in LA as opposed to in New Zealand with the Weta team. And so it's been a master class in itself, working in such close proximity to Jim. It's my job is to be on his hip, and to help guide him the best I can in visual effects, and and put ourselves in the best position to be successful in post. And so it's been quite the experience.
So we're going to talk a little bit more that a little bit later. But I think most of us can say that watching Avatar was a life-changing experience. I think my jaw was dropped the whole time when I saw it in the theater. I just thought it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So
That
congrats.
means the hours were vindicated. There you go.
Yeah. So you kind of mentioned some ways that you've made contacts in the industry, starting from when you're in the labs at school.
Yep.
And at 1 o'clock, I'm happy to say that we now have a 24-hour R lab, which probably may have like sent you over the edge if you were that hard of a worker. But you know, making contacts even now in school, you know, when you're in school, and then because a lot of people will ask me, how do I get connected to people in the industry? I don't know anybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't know anybody either. Matter of fact, the only contacts I would actually say that I had in the industry were the people that the instructors that I had at the academy. You know, it's like, I remember my comp instructor was a guy named Brian Connor, who's gone on to do great things in the industry, you know, at multiple studios. You know, I had animation instructors that were doing well. I had fluid dynamics instructors that were all actively working in the industry, right? So I had just natural connections from that. Just the faculty alone, you know, at the academy was one thing. The rest of them, you know, it's kind of funny that you don't make those contacts necessarily until you get in. But I actually got into the industry, and most of my close contacts in the industry now are people that I went to the academy with, you know, that were actually the people in the lab with me. I think I mentioned to you, you know, this the other day that, you know, that core group of us that just happened to find each other, and we're always there, and you end up hanging outside of work. We had similar interests and just as much drive as each other, you know, and we all ended up becoming pretty successful in the business, you know, which is, I don't think, an accident kind of thing. And you know, it's the people that were willing to work their butts off and learn this stuff, you know, and you know, you know, we've talked about this before too, that, you know, I consider myself lucky and never been the poster child for somebody that says, hey, here's how you get into the business, because it fell a bit into my lap. But I think you even corrected me in that, in terms of the, you know, I put myself in a position to get lucky. You know, I put myself in a position to be the person when they call the academy and says, hey, who do you want for this job? You know, so that to me is the messaging that would go out, you know, for me to any students out there in terms of how do you get in. It's put yourself in a position to get in. And I'll never forget this. When I was at the academy, the movie Finding Nemo had just come out. Yes, I'm old. But the Visual Effects Society was holding a screening at Pixar, and I thought, holy cow, they were allowing a certain amount of students to go, and I was like, I'm in. I signed up, got on the BART, went all the way out there, got on the bus, went to, you know, the gates there at Pixar, and I was like, you know, like any other geek about Pixar at the time. And we get into the theater, and we watch Finding Nemo, and there's a Q&A with the core group afterwards. And I remember somebody raised their hand in the Q&A, and it was a student, obviously, and the student says, how do I get a job at Pixar? You know, and the whole crowd's like, oh, you know, it's like, oh, it's the last thing you want to hear in these kind of deals. How do I get a job at Pixar? But I'll never forget it, because the person's response on the panel was, it came across a bit abrasive, but for me, it was not. And he said, put yourself in a position to get a job at Pixar, is what he said. And you know, you heard some kind of chuckles, but man, for me, I thought that was it. That was the messaging that I needed, was exactly that. And so it was a driver for me. I'll never forget that. I mean, to this day, I can vividly remember it, because it was a complete mindset change for me, in terms of, I am going to bust my tail to put myself in the position, if, you know, to get a job at Pixar. You know, I never worked at Pixar, but I got to do other things, you know. So it's to me, it's the motivation of being able to put in all the extra work, and then also surround yourself with other people, because I got lots of great ideas from my friends, you know, and like I said, I've had other opportunities, and I've been able to help other of those friends out get jobs as well too, right? When I went to some of these other studios, I was able to bring them in, and then they've gone off, and, you know, that was their opportunity in the door, and then they went off and did great things. One of my best friends, Adam Ely, was at the academy one day, and I was at Giant Killer Robots, and John Vager, one of the owners, comes to me and says, "Hey, we have Spider-Man 3 work. We need some texture painted. Do you know anybody that can paint textures?" And I was like, "I know a guy. I happen to live with him, but I know a guy." And he said, "Can he be here?" And I called Adam, and he's at the academy down the street. And I said, do you have your laptop with you?" And he said, "Yes." And I was like, "Can you grab your laptop and get to Giant Killer Robots right now?" And he's all excited. I'm sure he sprinted the whole way. And he gets there, gets the interview, gets the job for about 4 weeks or something like this, and then gets hired afterwards. And that was it. The rest is history. He's gone on to work for ILM and the art department, and he's worked for Weta Digital in the modeling department, and Digimat department. He's like been very successful, now working for Netflix. So it's you never know. That's why I said the people in the lab, make sure that you meet these people and become friends with them and learn from them, because that's like I said, those are my closest colleagues in the industry, are people that I went to the academy with. So
Wow. What do you think about being so close to ILM and Pixar and having industry professionals actually teaching the classes? And was that something that do you think helped
oh yeah
with systems and stuff? Yeah.
Well, because if I want to go learn how to pull a key, I can go buy a book, and it's going to sit there and walk me step by step on how to pull a key, right? Sure, that works great in packaged demos, right? And it's like, I can tell you that in no book has ever shown me how to actually pull a key or what's actually involved in pulling a key in comp, right? But having somebody like a Brian Connor, come over, at night, and I remember how many we had like 3 classes canceled that semester, or had to be the times had to be reset because he's on deadlines, and they're delivering Van Helsing at the time they were working on it. He was, I think, a comp soup on that or something, or a lead, and so they were having deadlines, and we get the call saying, "Hey, class is going to be postponed till another date," and which to me is just, God. So you're getting comp lessons from somebody that really knows what they're doing, and they're in the trenches. They know exactly all the detailed work that has to go into it, and all the techniques that you're going to learn. And you're just not going to get that out of a book. You're not going to get that out of a webinar kind of stuff or something like that. You got to get in with somebody who can sit there and just help you out with this kind of stuff and walk you through. These are the steps. This is the stuff that I've run into over the last year. Plates are coming in like this now. They're being shot on these cameras, which introduces different problems than back on film. It's on a red, now it's on something else. And so you need constant, up-to-date people in the industry to give you that kind of feedback. And so I thought it was invaluable.
Yeah, I always tell my students that it's like you have to basically have this bag that you continue to get your bag of tricks. And every shot is different and has different problems. And the more troubleshooting techniques that you gain over time, they'll help you get through it, which is why sort of working on real shots with a supervisor.
Oh, yeah.
In school, like we hit those problems, and then they start to collect that bag of tricks before they go into the industry. Hopefully that's the intention. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to start talking about the panel work that you're doing, similar to the Mandalorian stagecraft. But first I want to ask you, you've worked in games and you've worked in visual effects, doing feature work, and what I'm curious about is when you started, how those industries were separate, although you worked in cinematics, so maybe there was a little bit of a crossover, and now we're seeing with the real-time engines and the work being done on set that those worlds are starting to become closer and more integrated. So can you speak to that? Like, you being also working in games and working in feature work, like what the differences are and how they've come together more, and what might happen in the future.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely coming together, and in more ways. I mean, the separation I always find is the real-time engine is one thing, and people associate that with video games because that's what video games are in a lot of ways. Video games pre-cache, pre-can a bunch of stuff so you can have an experience, but make no mistake, it's a very controlled experience you're having, right?
Right.
And with the film moving into a lot of real-time engine stuff, it's we're in a situation where it's new. It's very much, in its infancy. And so there are industry standards that aren't there. There are, again, I think we've talked about this before. It reminds me some of the way VR was about 8 years ago, where it was like this new hot thing, but nobody can figure out what to do with it, right? And nobody. There's some very few applications you're like, hey, this really makes sense, and some that are just like cool, but that's it. They're cool. Whereas I think this one's different, because this basically rolls itself into the visual effects pipeline way more seamless, in a lot of ways. And it's not the answer to everything at all. There's going to be very specific kinds of ways of shooting that this really caters to. You can do things like the real-time engine is basically just an addition to what was Translite before, right? Where, even if you go back not even that long ago to Oblivion, you had full panos taken in Hawaii that were then projected on a stage 360 degrees, or how many ever degrees they needed. They built a set, this floating house. It was all reflective, and it all had to be done because of that, right? The integration of adding a digital extension and then putting reflections into the house would have been a nightmare. You just end up replacing everything, which is oftentimes even harder than doing it right. So they did it very smartly. They actually did all these panos. They did rear projection, or I'm not sure it was rear projection, but it was rear screen projection. It was projection, which gave you all the interactive lighting from the panels itself, or not the panels, but the screens, and you got the reflection, right? So that's not even that long ago. The technology now on LED panels has now gotten to the point where you can use those instead of projection, right? And it's not always going to be the best solution. Projection might be the best solution for a project, and because you can project on a very large screen for a certain price. These LED panels aren't cheap, when you start linking a bunch of them together, there's a price associated with all this stuff. So it's also a big giant production math equation you've got to do when you break down these scripts to say, hey, okay, here's what we're after. What is the best solution for this? And you've got to sit there and crank the numbers on everything. And, and aside from just money, there's all kinds of lead up time for how you're going to do things as well. Like me shooting panos is way different than me going out generating a bunch of 3D content to go in real time, right? And me running back footage on the screen is way cheaper from an FPS standpoint than trying to chase FPS on a bunch of 3D geometry. But the one thing that the real-time aspect of that's been introduced into this has also been parallax, right? Which is what you're seeing in shows like The Mandalorian and things like this that you're utilizing, where you get just enough parallax to where it integrates the entire thing. Instead of looking at it as a translite that's 20 feet away from the actor, and you can tell that's what it is. As the camera moves, you can see the parallax, and now nothing on the screen itself parallaxes. The gag's given up, right? And so if you got a nodal camera or it's locked off camera, sure, you can get away with it. But what all these productions want to do is move the camera. They want to be slightly more dynamic with it, and you want to get the lighting from it, which is the big thing as well, too, right? So you get full integration across everything. It's not perfect. A lot of it is going to end up being replaced in the end. There's lots of shows and lots of movies out there shooting stuff now that go into it with all the best intentions, but production is production. Things happen, and things end up getting replaced, right? So that's why I say it's still a bit in its infancy in terms of really nailing down all the processes that set us up for success on these shoots. But it has changed things. I mean, I'm about to wrap on a project now where we've been using this technique to do a city extension in the thing outside of a window, and it works beautifully. It's at night especially, you can see into the apartments of a building, and as the camera moves, you can see the parallax in it, and that little bit adds so much, and it also means that I can have the screen 15 feet away when actually that building facade is supposed to be 60 feet away, and it handles, when we're tracking the camera on set, it handles the parallax for us. And so it sells the depth as well, too. So you get proper movement on the background, which you would not get on a translite straight up as well. So
what about the lens? Just to get a little bit deeper in it, I've noticed, even though it's amazing the work done on The Mandalorian, I've noticed that just from an experienced eye that the lens problems, the depth of field issues are pretty dominant in these shots. So do you think that that's going to be solved since you're going on a screen and you're not actually shooting through a camera? It's a little tricky, right?
Yeah, it is tricky, and there's right now there's lots of limitations to what you can do too. It's on tests we had done recently, the idea is you can't pre-blur what's on the screen, given the fact that you're about to shoot it through a camera lens, which is going to blur right itself, right? And so you
Right.
do run into that kind of stuff where there are limitations to what you can do. So oftentimes what you're seeing on a lot of these shows or movies is that you just treat it as in the background is going to be at a certain depth of field, and you're not going to have any specific different depth of field along the depth of that screen, right? And most of the time it works, because even with depth of field, at a certain point you reach a point of infinite depth of field anyway, right?
Right.
So most of the time it works, and a lot of these shots are designed in a way to be successful as well too. It's like, you'll have entire scripts being written right now to shoot with this technique inside of a box, right? And but then we work on other films. We're prepping some now where these are big budget movies, and we're still just using these as translights. Similar to what they had done in Gravity. Where you've got enough content out there that you can actually previs the entire thing out, and you can use them for lighting your set, knowing that you're going to replace the extension later. It's been very successful in some movies recently, like the Star Wars movies. I know they did it in Solo, where you've got cockpit stuff going on and all that interactive lighting. You only need to take the assets and the lighting as far as to inform that. And then you can always increase the fidelity later, especially when it comes to, if you want to go to pre-rendered content at that point, where you're jumping way out of real time at that point, right? So the engines right now, obviously it's hardware, and a lot of people are using different softwares, whether it be Unity, Unreal, or whatever. There's more out there, and everybody's chasing hard drives, or not hard drives, but but graphics cards, to try and speed up processing, get as much as you can. And some of these softwares have done major leaps forward in terms of how much geometry you can carry in a scene, or how much lighting you can do in a scene, which are always going to hit the ceiling. It reminds me of back on a panel at Blizzard years ago. Somebody had asked in a QA about the render farm. They were like, "Oh, the render farm that size, don't you feel like you guys can do anything?" And I said, "No, every studio I've ever worked at, it doesn't matter what the render farm is, you always peg it out, and you always need more, kind of thing." So
Right.
it's the same way with the Unreal or any of these softwares right now. It's like you can take it as far as you can take it. And what you end up chasing at the end is, how do you optimize? Everything is about optimizing, and you're going and doing everything you can to try and optimize to get as much FPS as you can, because ultimately that's what you're chasing. And as you got a ceiling, you got to or floor rather, you've got to maintain to be able to shoot. So
there's always a need for compositors. That's not going to go away. It's just that
at
the work
all.
would be a little different.
No, at all. Like I said, I think if I took a major script and broke it down, you're going to have a portion of it, let's say 25%, where you're going to do LED panel work, and even then you're going to say like, hey, we're going to try our best to do in-camera work. But I can tell you right now, there's been plenty of shows at this point where you shoot the plate and you think it's okay, but when you really get the stuff back from the studio and you start looking at it, you're like, there's moire. And you're like, you realize that you can try and fix moire, or you're going to have to just replace the stuff, or there's stuff you're going to replace. You're just going to shoot it and you're going to replace it. But traditional visual effects has not gone away in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I'd still say the vast majority of the work that we do in the industry, vast majority, is still traditional. So yeah, there's going to be a need for compositing, and there's going to be because again, the engines can only do so much anyway at this point. They can't do sophisticated stuff. It's just not going to be able to do that, right? You could not do Avatar in one of these engines right now. It's not even close to that. So, and you'll know why when you see it and come out in about a year and a half, because it's next level stuff for the sequels. So
Thank you. That's really informative. And could you walk us through a typical, I know that there's probably not a typical day, but when you have a routine going on, can you just walk us through your day?
Well, yeah, it depends on the day. You're right. And it also depends on the stage of production. I can tell you essentially this production, the last one, the Avatar sequel, is kind of what it has looked like. And it started in the stage of when the show started. My job, first off, my job, I'm not posting the Avatar sequels. I'm actually the on-set VFX supervisor in LA. And so we started off the entire thing. I'm embedded with the client, and I get to work with the team at Lightstorm Entertainment, who is in charge of building. We have our own at Weta proprietary real-time engine, and that's what we've been shooting Avatar in. And we basically worked with Lightstorm Entertainment. They've got a crew there that builds out all of these worlds and helps build the assets for us to shoot on and mocap on. So my job was basically to help oversee assets coming in for motion capture, which is, not typically what you consider posting visual effects work. So it's prepping and make sure that we've got actors ready to have facial capture on. It's things like, hey, we've got part of my crew, I'm overseeing the crew. We've got people in makeup, checking to make sure that the dots added on the face for the facial capture is set up correctly, right? We've got assets we call prop specs that we're using to actually do the motion capture. Working with the productions mocap supervisor to get things set up to where when the director walks on in the morning, actors there in the morning, we're ready to go. We've got the 3D scene loaded up in Motion Builder. It's fully lit. All the stuff is in the scene. You can see all of the actors in the volume in the scene, and working with all the different departments, whether it be costume or whether it be props or anything like that. We shoot the things out, and then my job at that point would be work with the director, or in some cases the DP if he's on set. And we have to go back and do a beauty lighting pass of these entire scenes, up to the point where we prep them for Jim to shoot cameras on. And eventually he will walk out and we'll shoot cameras. After we've had all the mocap, you basically build an entire scene. And imagine, I always tell people, imagine it's almost like you have all these actors on set and you say action and they act out a scene, right? And then you say, okay, reset, and you say action, and they act out the scene. They do it 100 times. And the idea is that the director can go through and just bang out his camera angles, right? He's making a movie at that point, right? He's got all the action, we've mocapped it. And so my job is to be there and help on those days the best I can. We'll do real-time lighting. It's like lighting looks great from this angle. He's like, now he wants to go over here and shoot this angle. Well, right then and there, we've got to change lighting just like you would on set, right? You're swinging things around, adding edge lights where you need. And so those days are intense because you're trying to move at the same pace the director wants to move, and he's going to have an opinion, and you're going to get things done as quickly as possible. And then it reaches a point of turnover, and my jobs on those days are go through, work with the lab at Lightstorm and help them make sure that we've got the right motion in place. It's all synced up with editorial. Editorial's happy with everything. We've got facial that matches up, that it's going to go down to Weta. We've got any kind of notes from the director that we want tied in, package it up, and I'm working with producer, the VFX producer on the studio side to make sure everything's clean, packaged up, ready to then send to Weta to start posting. It's like we can't even start doing our work at Weta Digital until all of this work has happened. And it's a big lead up time. And so the hats that are required for the onset VFX suit are, it just depends on what stage of production. I on this production have been everywhere from in makeup, just kind of making sure things are going smooth there if need be, to 20 feet underwater in a wetsuit and scuba gear, taking HDRIs underwater.
Wow.
It's just been so broad in terms of what we would actually do on this show. So, but yeah, that's nothing's ever the same.
Well, I have two. That's just so. It sounds like a little city that's full of adrenaline and action, and just. This is going to lead up. I'm going to have a couple more questions for you, but I've seen that we're like lighting up with so many questions from the students and the audience. So I want to make sure we have time to answer those. But the next one is, when you're operating on that level of intensity for several months or whatever, like how do you balance your professional life with your personal life? And because, I remember the intensity when I worked in the industry it was so hard to just come down and have a life. Also, the hours can be long. So what would you say to that when I ask you about balance in your life?
I it was different for me when I was just me and my wife, which was a lot of years of the, and actually even pre my wife, in the industry. Eventually getting married, and then you want to be home, in the evenings and spend time with the person you're with. And then I now currently have a 5-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl that causes a whole different, thing. It's like, being present, for those parts of your life are, you want to do the best you can, right? And it's not easy, especially with the hours. I mean, it's and it depends on the film. Some films are smooth. Like I was just telling you, the movie that I'm worked on one for the last 6-8 weeks, super smooth, just bang, 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 bang. You're out every day on time, and it's great. Other movies are more complicated than that. You're going to spend way more time, a lot more hours, especially at certain parts of the production. There has a tendency, as you know, to be a crunch at the end of any project, in which case, I sarcastically would say bye to your family for about 3 months, kind of stuff. But some ways that's true, and in some ways it's not. Avatar for me has been, I live an hour from the studio, and these are the kind of little things you'd never think you'd have to take into account, but you absolutely have to take into account, because when you are commuting an hour there and an hour back every day, that in itself is 10 hours a week and just a commute. Think about that. And then you've got all the hours associated with being on set. You got call times in the morning. You got to be there early, because the VFX crew has a tendency to be one of the first people on set to make sure things are set up right, and you've got to run it till it's all done. So you want to blast out the door too, right? So the hours can be long, and sometimes it's a difficult balance, but with the family. For me, and this is probably going to be awful advice, I would just say that luckily I have a partner that's she's very understanding, and I have to say helpful, and understands the career, and the hours are long. That's just the bottom line for some of these shows. That not all. Again, I wouldn't want to speak for the entire studio. And actually, it also depends on the company. When I was in the film industry, they were longer than when I was in the game industry. When I worked for Blizzard, the hours were way more consistent. Kind of stuff. The idea of knowing that I was like, I have Saturday and Sunday available every weekend. I'm not sure how to plan around that. Because for years I was like, man, I'm probably working on Saturday because I've got deadlines. Kind of thing. But companies like Weta now, the company that I worked for in 2007, back when I started on the first Avatars in New Zealand, I worked tons of hours, just tons of hours on that show. The company's different now. They've made a major transition, because, and I think there's lots of reasons behind that. One of which being, people have families, and a lot of these people that stay at these companies a long time grow within the company, and they build families, and they don't want to work these crazy hours anymore. So I think as an industry, the whole industry's had to face it, over like the past decade, and make changes. And Weta is definitely one of those. It's hours are way down for most people at Weta, and and that's a good thing. The balance to me is, if I work some of these crazy weeks, you find that the work starts to drop. You're not thinking clearly, and it's just. And I think the studios are smart about that, and it's just better to to get the time. So luckily on this show in particular, we've not been that bad. So
Great. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the change in the movie industry over the last 10 years or so, and specifically the events that have happened over the last 4 years.
yeah,
And the need for more inclusion in our industry.
yeah.
Have you seen changes in that way? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, goodness, I remember, and again, this is across multiple industries. My even at Blizzard, and that's as close as, let's see, about 2012, I think, when I started at Blizzard. Even in the game side, it was just there weren't many women in the industry. I mean, talk about a boys' club, and the same thing with the film industry for a long time. And that's just slowly gone away. And I don't exactly know why that is. I mean, I know that the studios themselves have taken a major interest in promoting it. I know that a company like Blizzard has an entire department that's there to help promote diversity and everything in the company, right? So I say they're making major initiatives, and Weta Digital is the exact same way. We have whole groups that are trying to, promote inclusion. That goes for, everything from gender to sexual preference. It's like the whole gamut. I think the whole thing's is really changing. And even as short, and I say it's short, I mean, I know I've been in the industry for over 15 years, but it's still, even in that time frame, the industry is a lot older than that. And even in that time frame, there's been a major exponential curve, I think, in terms of the changes that have been happening. To where now, I can go into even the Lightstorm here on Avatar, massive, amount of women working inside of the studio in major roles. I think traditionally it used to always be production is where you found the women, always happen to be the producers or the editor of a movie, but now you're seeing it across the board, artistic and both technical, all of the above. It's kind of, there's been quite a bit of a transition, I think, over the last decade, especially.
Yeah, and we hope that it continues to go in that direction. Okay, I have to ask you personally, because it's just I'm personally interested in knowing, do you ever get to work on shots anymore? Do you ever get to do shots?
Yes. I'm never the person filing the shots, unfortunately. It's kind of funny. Back when I was at, and I have artists that have worked underneath me that would probably laugh at me for saying this, but I still like to be in the trenches. I think it's a bit dangerous sometimes, especially as much as the industry is kind of doing this transition right now into this real time, as you alluded to earlier, to get too far out of the trenches with that stuff.
Right.
Especially when you're on set, because you have a tendency on set to need to be a power user. Like you've got to be, you're like the last stop. You need to be there and make sure that you've got the right people in place and this sort of thing. And so I stay in the trenches a bit, and even on Avatar, I work with a crew for the lighting, improve the lighting on this side before it gets turned over to Weta. And I'll have a tendency, if we're doing a couple iterations and it's not quite getting there or something like that, I'm the world's worst about just opening up a file and doing something and then passing it back and saying like, hey, what do you think about this? So it's like I don't actually final them, but I definitely do stay in the trenches, and I'm in the software a lot, kind of thing. So, and I don't plan on changing that anytime soon. So,
okay, the last question I'm going to ask you before we have Will come in to give you questions from the audience, which there are plenty of.
Yeah.
I have to mention the pandemic and the changes that have happened. We're trying to mirror the industry with our lab and Tardici and all the stuff that we're doing to. How do you think the pandemic, keeping it positive, how do you think it's changed our industry for the better?
The way I look at it is there's a lot of instant positives. I think time will tell whether or not those remain instant positives. The obvious number one thing is I'll speak from personal experience on this, is I get to spend way more time with my family. I find that on this production, in the stage that it's in, and it's not true of every stage we've been on, so I wouldn't want to sugarcoat it like that. The stage that we're in on the production right now, I can do this job predominantly from home. And I absolutely can with no efficiency loss. Wow. And I think we're finding that across most of the studio at this point because of the stage of production that we're in. It's also allowed us to hire remote, that we used to not be able necessarily to do, or that it was kind of frowned upon, I guess. Which right, say that again?
Access to more talent in different areas.
Absolutely. And again, I don't want to sugarcoat it too much, because I think there's some long-term variables that need to be looked at, in terms of this, because there are certain things about, one of the things I love about Weta, for instance, is the culture, and the relationships, that I got to build while, there. And the same thing goes with the production that, that I'm on now, even being embedded in the client, you become very good friends with people, right? And I saw a thing online recently talking about this that I actually agreed with, and I was like, a lot of people forget about the fact that most of us were thrown into this having already had those relationships in place, right? Like we already worked with these people, we already knew them, we already knew about their families, we knew about certain things are closer to some than others. And a lot of that relationship comes between meetings. It's after the meeting's wrapped, the sitting there chatting. It's in the hallway on the way. It's at craft services. You stop by to fill up your coffee on the way to the week. It's things like this that you build a culture, and a lot of trust around other people. And then, we've had people where we've tried to bring them on since the pandemic remotely. And yeah, they're part of the team, but it is much more difficult to build those relationships. And you don't really have them because the days are so structured now that it's meeting from here to here. That one ends and immediately goes into the next meeting. And the difference is like click, click, and you're in the next meeting, right? And you're missing all the in between. And so that's the part that I worry about. It has done really great in terms of work efficiency. If you're looking at dollars and numbers and going like, hey, yeah, we can get work done and it's cheaper. We don't need all this stage space, or we don't need all this building or something like that. But I wonder about the long-term effects in terms of the company cultures that will potentially be lost. I think that, it's like, I always look at it like Google back in the day, it's like working at Google was supposed to be like this crazy cool experience, this awesome campus, very whimsical. And, you had all these innovative things going on. Imagine working for them now and that's gone.
I know, right?
What would that experience be like, and I don't know if I don't want to talk about anything about Google. I know nothing about Google, but I'm just using that as an analogy of that cultural thing is the same with every company. And they're all going to struggle to figure out, like, how do you keep that culture and yet still work remotely and everybody's just from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, right? Without scheduling sometimes of like literally saying, hey, let's have Zoom over or lunch over Zoom as a team. It might be kind of weird the first time to sit there and eat on screen, but you could get used to it. And I used to have a friend, or I still have a friend. I used to live with a guy, Adam Ely, the guy I was telling you about that I went to school with years ago. Mm-hmm. We're still very close friends. I remember in New Zealand walking into his room one day, having a whole conversation with him about something. And then his computer spoke to me and I was like, what the heck? And I turned around and he's been on a Skype call with his buddy from Tennessee for hours and hours and hours. And they're sitting there just drawing. And they had just been on there because they used to live together. And they're sort of used to just being able to just chat back and forth. And they would be silent for an hour and not say anything. And then one of them would just be like, hey, something, so, and that was totally normal to them. And I feel like those kinds of things need to be moved into this whole virtual aspect of stuff that, you could have an open session or something like that would allow people to just small talk and collaborate as they're working, and
you bring up such an important point about downtime, even if it's a minute or two, and also just not being able to look at someone in the eye and connect, it's
well, you're right. Actually, in this same thing I saw, the guy was talking about blue sky meetings, this basically we're trying to go and throw in ideas around, that those are virtually impossible when you over Zoom, because interrupting, he points out that interrupting over a Zoom call is almost disrespectful, right? It's just it's rude, kind of thing. Whereas when you're in these rooms and you're talking over each other, it's totally fine. It's part of the process, right? And it's like you can have a couple conversations going on at a time, and it's all part of the process. That's very difficult to do remote. And so that's why I don't think that some of these people in company that have jumped onto it's all it's ever going to be in the future is this remote thing. I think that's absolutely wrong. That it will end up coming back, and there will be a balance. But there will the in-person stuff is really going to be important moving forward.
Yeah, I think about the people coming out of school who don't have families and maybe international. They may not, have a community, and it's been really difficult for some of them to because of the isolation. And
absolutely.
And you've just brought up so many points that I can't wait to marinate on to think about. But so I'm going to stop talking now. And I'm going to introduce Will Ziegler, who's our editing coordinator, and he's also been our moderator on other panels. And we have so many questions. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Will, and start.
Yes, we have great questions from the audience. Actually, two of these are related to things you were just talking about. And so I'm kind of put these questions together. Yiwen asked, when you feel lost or get stuck in some place, how do you find your passion or energy? Just some advice for getting inspiration and energy back up again. And this is similar to Brendan's question. Is the work sometimes overwhelming even with all the years you've been in the industry? How do you overcome and deal with it?
As for the first question, I get stuck all the time, especially when you're, sitting there trying to, let's say something as simple as light 2,500 shots in a movie, right? And we've got to pre-light them on this side before they go to Weta. And it's like, gosh, how many different lighting scenarios can you come up with? And you get a certain scene, you put lights in, like, God, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. I always just go back. I mean, this is going to sound cliche as all get out, but I have a tendency to keep. I've got like a whole directory structure on my computer and on some hard drives of film. And it's not the movies themselves, it's stills from movies. And it's just, anytime I'm watching the movies and you see something, certain lighting scenario, and you're like, man, there's something cool about it. I don't know what it is, but I like it. I'll save it, and it goes in. I'm actually very good. I used to not be years ago. I'm very good now about being organized about it as well too. So I'll find out who was the DP, who was the director. I'll categorize these things, tag them, and I'll keep them. And it'll even be certain lighting scenarios like dusk. I'll have it tagged in these, kinds of ways to where I can go like, I got a dusk scene, but I can't think of something like really great to do, and just look for some inspiration, because I'm never going to be as good a lighter as half these, DPs out there that I, worship, kind of thing. So, I can go out and frankly, getting to work with some great DPs, you learn a bunch of new stuff. But I actually maintain quite a bit of a inspirational, a library for myself, just to kind of re-energize myself, because every time I go through and watch these movies or have experienced one of these films or something like, or even a piece of, still photography, there's an emotional response you've had to it, and you carry with it. It's just like being nostalgic about anything. You watch a movie that, that you saw 25 years ago or something like that. And I haven't seen it in that long, and it's virtually unwatchable now because it's so bad, but I still have the same emotional experience, right? Kind of thing. And so anytime I kind of get a little jaded or, stuck, I have a tendency to go sifting through this, because instantly those emotions start coming back, and you kind of get this re-inspiration of stuff. And it's not as much as like, go back and watch a bunch of movies, because who has the time to go back and watch a bunch of movies? So again, to me, the idea is that I can create a library of stills that are kind of the best of the best from me, and gain a lot from it. It was something I even did when I went to Blizzard. We created one at Blizzard and started building one out that we could have there for people to even come to me with suggestions. They were like, hey, I was looking at the thing and I thought I could light the shot something similar to this. I'm like, that would be great, for the scenario kind of stuff. So it allowed kind of a back and forth for us to be able to all pick from. And the second question was exactly how was that worded?
Let's see. It was about being overwhelmed, even with all your years in the industry. Do you ever feel overwhelmed? How do you deal with it?
Every other day. So let's be honest about it. This is not Saturday morning cartoon kind of stuff we're working on half the time. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen on these projects. There's a lot of money involved. There's a lot of big personalities, and it's every day is overwhelming, in a lot of ways. Some days just go through smooth, and those are the ones you just like, you look down at your clock and like, wow, it's 6 o'clock and I've not been stressed all day long. That's rarely happens, right? And again, it has to do with stages of production too. Certain days when you're out on set and you've got a crew of hundreds of people there, production spending a ton of money, and there's a visual effects issue and a question that comes up, and the production is going to move forward without, no matter what, because they're going to make their day. But your job out there is to basically put your studio in the best position in post to be successful. So if you get a bad plate and it's shot wrong, you just cost your own studio a bunch of money and time, and you're probably not going to end up with as good a shot as you could have. So there's pressure there in terms of just being coming up with the right answers on the day when you're shooting stuff. And a lot of that requires pre-planning and, and to be honest with you, some experience in learning how to pre-plan for that stuff. And I'm learning constantly on this stuff. I'd love to say I walk out there and I'm like, I'm the guy, I just know exactly how to shoot this stuff. No. Every other movie, you're kind of on the fly figuring out it's the lesser of the evils half the time. There's no great way to shoot this. So what's the best one, that I can think of. And so, the stuff becomes overwhelming all the time. And you just have to kind of remind yourself, you're surrounded around a bunch of really, really good talent. It's you're not out there on an island most of the time. And I will constantly make phone calls, or even I'll call, Joe Lettieri back at Weta Digital and say, hey, we're shooting this. What do you think? Kind of stuff. It's like, you've got these exceptional people around you and use them, kind of stuff. Nothing's better than getting your stress down than getting a second opinion by people you really trust, right? So it's, I remember that being that way in school in the lab at 2 a.m. and I'm like stressed the daylights out about something. And that core group of people, we have all 8 of us crowded around my monitor looking at something and getting opinions from everybody, kind of stuff. And that's good. That's not bad. That's great. Even if I was flat wrong and I'm like, God, I got to start over, you're going to get a better product that way. So, that process doesn't change.
It's such a communal industry. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's the beauty of it, really. Just the teamwork and
Absolutely.
Well, since you brought up the labs again, I'm going to read this one. It's not a question, but I will vouch for the fact that Dan and Adam Ely worked very hard as students at the Academy. This is from Charles Cagle. Hi, Charles. Good to see you.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, Charles.
There's a few questions that are similar, but they kind of want to know what if it's different working on shots for the game industry as the film industry. Someone broke it down like TV versus movie or animation, but you've worked in all these different pipelines for animation, for games, for movies. How different are they, or are they that different?
They used to be more different than they are today. I think both from a financial standpoint, it's to the studio's benefit to try and make the pipelines as similar as possible. That way you can seamlessly jump between, film and television. And television itself, the fidelity of what goes into television, the expectation today, especially from some of these bigger budget productions, like, your Game of Thrones that went through for a decade, that they raised the bar so high. Now you got Mandalorian going through, or you've got film quality effects going through a television, an episodic series. Now that's a good thing for us, from my perspective, but those in the visual effects industry, that's great, because that one means that the studios are taking effects seriously, right? They're not just like, hey, here's your nothing budget, now make something cool. No, they understand that these effects can really sell a TV show, and that they're important to the narrative, and the story trying to be told. And so I think that stuff is starting to kind of come together in terms of those pipelines. They're always going to be a little different. Budgets have a tendency to still be slightly different depending on what you're working on. And timelines are also the thing. Episodic work generally doesn't have as much time as film. But they're definitely getting closer. And so I don't think it's as big a gap as it used to be. And that includes time, money, and tools. Most of the tools that we're using, I mean, we're working on special projects tools at Weta in Unreal, using hair systems that we've developed for the Apes movies, kind of stuff. And so it's all starting to kind of slowly come together. And of course, over like the next 10 years, I imagine it's going to really, really come together as the real-time engines can handle more and more. So
what about games? Do you feel like, here's some work of yours for cinematics for games. I mean, this is not different or too dissimilar from what we see in film nowadays?
No, and I remember back when I was there, Warcraft was being done by ILM, the movie. And we got message back from the Warcraft team that they were just so impressed with the work that we were doing on the cinematics, and coming from them, that was high praise, especially for, me having come from the industry, but a lot of these guys hadn't, and they'd just been at Blizzard, so it was, huge, for them to hear that. And rightly so, because, at Blizzard, we spared no expense when it came to art direction. It's like art direction ruled everything in that. You're not doing live action plates. A lot of visual effects has a tendency to be, you shoot plates and your job is to integrate digital things into that plate and match, a level of photorealism to it. Whereas when you're working on stuff that's fully CG, it has a tendency to be art direction rules everything, right? It's like what's right is what people say is right, that sort of thing. And so it's really important that you have a really strong direction, going into these projects, and the stuff that the art directors did on some of these projects like Overwatch, like you're seeing right now. We were working with the game. Again, I worked on the cinematics team, not on the game. But we were working directly with the game team on that project, because the game was all going to be launched at the same time. We were going to launch it with these shorts that we were creating. So we're changing designs on the fly. They're changing, what their powers are. They're changing motifs of the actual sets that we're going to be doing on the pre-rendered side. And all of it was a collaboration back and forth on that sort of thing. And so That in itself was way different, but the quality, I thought the Overwatch stuff we did from an animated feature standpoint was so proud of it, just because I felt like there was a lot of attention paid to detail. We could have easily packaged up a bunch of crap and just sent it out there, and gotten it. And, there's a lot of people that wouldn't even have known the difference, but there are a lot of people that do. And I think that that's what set that work apart from, when even my friends that worked in the animated feature business saw it, and they were just like, wow, like that, we're surprised you guys took it that far. And I was like, oh, and it's done nothing but get better. I worked on the first 5 that we launched, and then there've been many more since, and including some like longer ones. And it's and I know that there's more being worked on at this moment. They're going to look even better. And so
this is one of my favorite
again,
ones.
it's not
I have to
changing
say.
the art style. It's just refining and getting more attention to detail and things like that. And so they're a little different. It's like working for the 2 studios was one was focused on matching plates and photorealism. The other one was, you had certain IPs like Overwatch where you got to just create new things and try and create beautiful images. But then you had like Warcraft and Starcraft where we did go for hyperreal looks, and we studied a lot of film reference for those things, and a lot of photography. And we worked with great art directors and directors that helped us create a look that was still stylized but had a hyperreal feel to them. And it kind of goes back to every single project's a little bit different, and sometimes you get in this rut in visual effects where you're just doing live action film after live action film after live action film, and there's no fantastical quality to it. But then you get that one project where the director wants to twist it a little bit, and it's so much fun when you get those, so yeah, whenever you can get them, you kind of get to stretch a whole different part of your brain again, kind of thing. So I always say it's a really good job or a good thing for visual effects artists that are doing more live action features every now and then to jump over to an animated feature, because it does help keep that side of you a little bit expanded. It's like that's the excitement I have over Weta, announcing that we're opening an animation division, to do animated feature films and potential episodic stuff down the road. Is that you'll have some artists that will be able to do live action and then jump over, and work on the animated side for a show, just to kind of have a change of pace and then kind of go back, and get to learn tools and pipelines associated with each, which are quite different, so.
Will Weta be hiring artists in LA, or are most of their artists in New Zealand?
I don't know. I think that's yet to be determined. We've gotten people in-house recently. The studio's growing quite a bit, expanding and setting itself up as best we can for success with this. And I think definitely the idea of hiring outside of New Zealand, and remote people is absolutely probably something planned. Don't quote me on it. We haven't talked about it that far. Right now we're in the early stages of things, but the prospect is definitely exciting.
There are a couple questions here. Actually, there was a few, so I'm sorry if I've missed some, but I know that Darren, Pearly, and one other person have all asked about portfolios. And since you're talking about all the different types of stuff out there that people can work on, what are some tips for your portfolios, creating a website, things like that? How much of that do they absolutely have to do? Like, what's the best methods for that?
Well, it's interesting now, coming from where I came from, because the technology is so different now than it was when I was trying to get a job. Your idea of a portfolio was burning it on a DVD and mailing in the DVD in an envelope with a folded up resume and hope it ended up in the right hands and the right stack, kind of thing. Luckily, technology's changed so much that all this stuff's online now. It's I would definitely there's nothing wrong. When I worked at Blizzard, I did a lot of interviewing and hiring. I actually even came to the Academy Spring Show back and did some portfolio reviews at that with Blizzard. And I remember telling somebody at that point, I remember hearing mixed messages when I was in school about, hey, don't put everything good at the beginning, spread it out to where people, and I can tell you that's not true. And what is true is probably what you've heard before, which is generally somebody's going to turn your demo reel off in 20 seconds. 20 seconds is what you've got to basically make your impression for them to either keep watching or turn it off. And so, and I don't mean that to add pressure or anything like that. I'm saying that to help you understand when you put your demo reel together, put your best foot forward when it comes to that stuff. Everybody's been in school and everybody knows some projects are going to be better than others. Some you have more time than others. And, frankly, there's a learning curve you go through in school. You may have some filler you've added in there because you're like, I'm too short. I need to add something else. I'm going to put this project that's questionable on there. It's like that happens. Nobody's going to judge you for that stuff. I think everybody's going to judge you on your best work, frankly. And at least that's the way I looked at it. And we'd be in a portfolio review at one of these companies and say, okay, we're going to have like 20 reels to look at today, because there's a whole group of people that go through and filter out the reels that I'm going to look at, right? I don't look at all 300 that arrived. There's somebody going through looking at them. They're saying, hey, here are the 20 best that we feel. You look at that for the 3 slots you're hiring, right? And and it's the same thing. You're going to have 45 minutes to look at this stuff, so you can't sit there and watch a 3-minute long demo reel for every single person. It's just not going to happen. But what you can pretty much tell in watching these demo reels very quickly is, do they get it? Was there some level of detail that was in the work that you're like, if I give that person enough time and resources and they can give me that kind of, attention to, detail, that's what I want to hire, and to me, that was always quality over quantity was always the thing for me. I'd rather look at a demo reel that's 30-second long than look at one at 3 minutes long if it had good stuff, So I would say from my perspective, it would be front load your demo reel. Show your best foot forward to get it out there, because what you don't want to be is say like, hey, I held on to that one thing that was really good and they turned it off before they ever got there, right? And I hate to be cynical, because I know how hard you guys work on stuff, because I did the same thing. But it is true what they tell you. It does get turned off, kind of stuff. In terms of websites and stuff like that, that's a bit new to me. I never really went to anybody's website to look at anything unless that was the link that they gave us to look at their demo reel. Most of them had to be a tendency to be the same. They were on one of these standard sites like SmugMug or Vimeo or something like that. It was just a link with a password, kind of stuff. So it didn't require a custom website. So I wouldn't stress so much on the custom website thing if that's what people are thinking. Not unless you have a lot of other content that you want to show other than, a reel. Like if you've got artwork or stills, other sites, some sites are set up to do both. But I wouldn't go out and try and build your own website. You're not going to impress anybody, I don't think, by building your own website. It's the content that's on the website that people are after, right? So save yourself some time and effort with that, and go off and use one of these more packaged, websites, and create an account, put your stuff on there. We know them. I know these websites. I know how to navigate them, and I know how to look for stuff, and just make sure you've got clear links to stuff. Resume, understandably, you're going to have a very limited resume. So I wouldn't worry too much about the resume either. If I'm hiring from somebody that's out of school, I know what to look for and I know what not to look for. To me, a lot of it's references. So I would include references on your stuff, because I might recognize, this kind of goes back to what Catherine was talking about earlier when it comes to networking. There are plenty of names that you put Charles Kegel on there and I'm going to be like, I know Charles. Like I could reach out to Charles and he's going to tell me about this person and whether or not they're really, the right person for this role, right? And I can trust what that guy's saying. And so it's that kind of thing. I would definitely use the references from your school as well too. Don't leave that stuff out, because it can be the difference. It's these little things can be the difference about getting a job or not. It's like, be like, hey, I took this animation class, or I took a comp class from Brian Connor. I'm like, I know Brian. I took comp from Brian. I'm going to call Brian and ask them, what they think. So don't hesitate to do that kind of stuff.
Just be sure you ask before you put someone down as a reference. I've had students do that.
It's an etiquette thing. Yeah, it's an etiquette thing. Here's a really specific one, more close to what you're what you do now. But Kevin wants to know what suggestions you have, the best way to go about getting on set, being on set VFX. I think he wants to be an on-set supervisor someday. So maybe start as a set PA or production crew. That's part of his question.
It's an interesting one. There's a few different routes. Most people, well, I guess it depends. If you want to go into visual effects supervision, I'd say that there used to be a more traditional route of that. And you kind of need to be an in-house VFX supervisor before you get to that point. Because a lot of movies, it's the person who's in charge of the film, the VFX soup in-house, like let's say a Weta Digital. You're gonna have the supervisor that's posting the movie is going to fly on set for the 3-6 months it takes to shoot it, and then go back and post the film and finish the film, right? That's their job. It's part of the job is to go on set and do the work. Part of that is changing, and some studios treat it a little differently. Like my job in the last few years have been to just do set work. So I'll work with a VFX soup at the studio who's not going to travel. COVID obviously put us in that situation even more. Like the show that I just completed, I really only did it because we couldn't travel other VFX soups, internationally. And so I just kind of got together with the soup that's going to be posting it, said, hey, how do we want to do this stuff? Worked on, figuring exactly the content we needed and did it that way. I do the on-set work, and then they're going to do any post work later. We have another one coming up this summer, the exact same thing. Got to go to Atlanta to shoot for a month on a big project, and it's the same thing. It'll be posted by another soup there, but we're definitely in partnership on the whole thing to make sure that all the set work is done exactly what we need to set us up for a success on the back end. So the VFX soup route in-house is a big thing, because the thing about being an on-set VFX soup is you kind of have to know a lot about a lot. You have to be pretty well rounded in a lot of different areas, and that just takes time. It's like one of those things, like you got to be patient with it. You'll find that there are a lot of people out in the industry now that are being labeled as virtual production supervisors. And that just happens to be people that have gotten into the real-time stuff early, and you'll have certain sets that are being shot very heavy on that portion of it, and so there's a bit of a fast track there. But you'll also have somebody partnered up that's going to be more the post supervisor that understands the back pipeline part of it, So I would say post house, working through them to eventually move over. If you just want to work on set, there's departments you can focus in that have a tendency to be on-set departments, whether it be motion capture, facial capture, or virtual production. Those things in general. I mean, virtual production by definition is pretty much on-set work. So if you want to get into that side of it, more the real-time aspect of it, as one of the virtual production right now is this enormous. I hate to even use the word, and Catherine, we've talked about this. I hate to use the word because it's this enormous umbrella for a bunch of crap. It's just like all these different techniques that go into shooting on a set fall under this thing of virtual production. And I think a lot of people think virtual production, Unreal, virtual production, Unity, virtual production is that. That's not virtual production. That's just one tiny little thing of what is virtual production, going into one of those areas would also allow you to be doing set work, kind of thing. So we even have crew, like I said, at Lightstorm working on the Avatar. They're straight out of school, got a job working in the lab doing environment builds, in our engine, but they're directly interacting with James Cameron. It's like they're right there in the thick of it, and so. There's lots of different routes. There's no direct one that says, hey, here's the clear career path that'll get you right on set. Nah, that doesn't exist. You can focus in some areas, though, that would put you in the best position to try and get out there. And I would say virtual production right now is the fastest. Or, if you want to go into more of being able to be on set soup and post things, then you're going to want to go through a post house for that and gain as much experience there as you can. And I would suggest if and when you guys get the opportunity, which I'm sure you will, to get into a studio, whether it be one of the giant ones or small ones. I started in a small one, and I would actually recommend to everybody to start in a small one, frankly. If you're wanting to jump and go straight to ILM, I wouldn't recommend it. The main reason is because you get pigeonholed really quick in those studios. You're going to go in and be a lighter, and that's all you're going to do. Whereas I remember going to Giant Killer Robots, and I was in effects working on Johnny Storm fire effects for the first Fantastic Four movie back with Chris Evans. And I remember I was still in school, still working on my thesis project. And I remember comping. I was at work comping my thesis project, working on it one day. And the comp soup at the studio walked past me, and he looked at it and he's like, hey, what's that? That's cool. And I was like, oh, I'm working on my thesis. And he's like, can I take a look? And I said, sure. And he sits down beside me. And over the next hour, he completely demolishes my comp, and we recomp it together. and he shows me why. He tells me why why I would use one note here instead of five, and all these sorts of things. And it was just this, again, master class in compositing that I got in an hour from the comp soup at the studio. A guy named Jason Porter, I'll give him a shout out. I didn't have to do that. And I wouldn't have gotten that probably at one of these other studios. It was just, you're in such close proximity to these other disciplines, and you can, one day I'd be, doing effects, and I say, hey, I need to model something. I could just model it and texture it, and I could grab the guy who's in that department. He'd be like, yeah, do this. He helped me out and helped me understand stuff when I was doing. So very quickly, within a year, I was a generalist, really. And to me, I was told later when I got hired at Weta Digital by the soup that hired me, that they preferred to hire generalists from smaller studios because they had more success in them coming in and just being able to roll right into things, because they said that if you hire from some of the major studios, artists have a tendency to be a bit institutionalized. It's like they've worked for 8 years with all the exact same tools. And so if you give them a show inside of that studio, they know exactly what tools and buttons to push to do all these things, but they don't really understand everything behind it. And they find more valuable into people that have had to kind of grind it out a little bit and learn a lot of stuff. So, don't have your eyes just set on these Pixars or ILMs. Not to say if you don't get a job, take it, obviously do, but don't think that that's it. That's the only one that would be success. I would definitely go for the small studios because you're going to get exposed to a lot more faster, from my perspective.
That's fantastic, because you answered like a couple other questions as well there. So good job. About the small studio, large studio thing specifically. People did have questions about that. But since you brought up Weta, and that's where you are, Erickson would like to know, what is the culture like at Weta Digital?
Culture is a broad word. I mean, like I said, the company that I started at back in mid 2000s was very, we were a machine, man. It was just, got in there for Avatar. I started right at the beginning of Avatar, so I had no experience before that. But there were a lot of reputational things going through in terms of hours. People just worked crazy hours to get these big projects. It's 3 years and 4 or 5 years of Lord of the Rings, and then right off that King Kong, right off that we were going into Avatar. And so the culture for me, my experience there has changed quite a bit over like the last 15 years or 13 years that I worked there, or off and on there, is that it did get more in what I'm going to categorize it as family centric, kind of stuff. The hours just came down, right? It's like work-life balance became much more of a thing, and I think that's really important, to the studio now and how we move forward, is that work-life balance is everything kind of stuff. It's like the family's bigger than the movie, kind of thing. And I think that that's catered to quite well. And there's lots of things in place in terms of inclusion, as Catherine was talking about earlier, and with the studio's growth happening, we've had a lot of upper management come in over the last year in terms of new partners and new CTO and new CEO, and the whole company is just kind of establishing itself to be a much broader studio than just a post house. We're going to have our hands in a lot more things, and it's important that we set ourselves up, to be able to handle that sort of stuff. So culturally wise, it's great. It's very collaborative. It's difficult. The studio is spread across Wellington. It's not like we're in one central campus. That's not Weta at all. You've got literally miles between buildings, but everything's connected, and there's a lot of events, where everybody gets to come together as a studio. But it's that requires work on the artist part to be able to reach out. You're talking well over 1,000 people that work at Weta Digital, and when you're not, that'd be hard enough even if you were in the same building to really build relationships with everybody. And so being spread out, that's why it's important the company does a lot of that kind of stuff that brings the studio together outside of the walls, which allows kind of what we talked about earlier, that culture stuff to continue, and to build, because in a lot of ways working at Weta could feel like remote work, because, I'm working directly with people that are in a building miles away, but that doesn't happen because of all the work that happens to bring everybody together outside of the walls. So
this is a fun one, but it's one I'm actually curious about. Danielle asks, what is your reaction when you see a goof someone online has posted in a movie or points out online? She doesn't say specifically one you worked on, but I'm curious about someone who's like in the industry and has done this, and then like IMDb lists something as a goof. Has that ever come up?
Oh yeah, that was all the time.
How
it's like somebody will notice set person in the plate we forgot to remove, or something like that. We got there all over the internet, right? You'll even see things where people have snuck things in, right, like their last name on a building facade or something like that. It's just, that stuff happens. It's we have lots of eyes on these things before they go out the door, and even after they go out the door, the studio has lots of eyes, but things happen. Things are going to get through.
Yanting wants to know, what is the most challenging part of Avatar? And I'm assuming they're talking about the series of movies, because they ask, how do you remain up to date with the new technologies?
That's hard, actually. That's a good point. We ran into this on the first movie back in 2007 when we started it, which was, the first shots that you final on the movie, the post is so long that by the time you get to the end, you've made a lot of innovations in the technology. And frankly, the shots just look even better than they did a year and a half before that. So you have that debate of like, God, do we need to go back and redo a couple of those shots that might not look quite as good? That is literally the nature of long productions. It's just going to happen. It always does. If you work on these big tentpole movies that take multiple years to post, that's just going to happen. You're going to have some technology that you started on the show that is obsolete by the end, and we'll definitely have that on Avatar. I mean, there's going to be some things that we, back when the tools were being built, 10 years ago for these sequels, to start, moving them forward, even to the first day of production back in May of 2017 or something. You look at it and the movie's not coming out until December of 2022, right? It's a long time. There's a lot of innovation and stuff that happens in between there. And so that's just going to happen as well too. You will have some technology that was state of the art at the time that everybody's using by the time the movie comes out, and it's very uninteresting EPK, or behind the scenes footage. But then you've got other stuff that's just such a far leap ahead that nobody's still got. And that's the real fun stuff that you kind of get to show off in the end and be like, yeah, we've had this for 4 years and none of the rest of you still have it. So it's and we do have that stuff going on. And then there's, frankly, to go along with that, there are certain technologies that take that long to actually flesh out. So some that we've been working on for 4 years that we're still not quite there, but we will get there before the end, and you're going to see it on camera. Like our new facial system, is brand new, and it's again next level stuff, and it's the team working on that has spent a long time getting everything in place, but it's a big buildup to also a big payoff in the end, and it takes a certain kind of show to get the opportunity to do that kind of technology. Not every show gives you that many years and time to be able to develop that stuff. And so that's why the real gems like Avatar, when they come around, open the door to be able to say, okay, you have to be strategic about it at the beginning. What technologies do we want to try and pull off? But we've got the time and we've got the people. Let's do it. And that way we can do that same thing that the first one did, which was a big leap. And that's the only way those leaps happen, is when you get chances to do stuff like this. So it's the double-edged sword, right? Some become obsolete and some you get the time to actually make happen. So
we want to be respectful of your time, so I'm going to make this the last question, but it's sort of more than one. It's multiple students are understandably, reasonably, maybe even more so this year, concerned about, when they graduate, going into the industry. What advice would you have for students that are feeling a bit intimidated? But I like Wilmage's question. I'm gonna flip it a bit. When did you feel, in your transition from student to VFX professional, what was the trigger that made you feel like, I'm actually a professional, I'm a working professional now, not just a student? When did that actually happen?
About a year after I started working.
So it takes some time.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you get the initial celebration, go out and have drinks with friends about like, I got my first job, holy crap, like school was all worth it, kind of stuff. But then you go to work and you're stressed out just because it's real. It's the for me, it was the pressure that I built up for myself, because it was everything that I put all of this time and effort into, and I finally got the opportunity, right? And you don't want to screw it up, and there's that constant thing of like, in the visual effects industry, it has a tendency to be a movie to movie contract. You have a job as long as there's a movie, but it's not like other careers where you get hired and it's just your job. You go to it every day. You don't have to worry about anything. You're not going to get fired unless you really do something bad. In this case, you might not have a job after the first movie, and they would say, thank you, cool. And then you're back to the drawing board. And at least you've got this resume builder, but that's it, And so I'd say after my first year of working at Giant Killer Robots and having done a couple of movies and starting on the third, that you kind of settle into it a little bit and you breathe a little bit and you understand that this is just the industry that I've chosen, right? And I'm going to have to be able to handle this lifestyle, right? And I am going to have to be able to be okay with maybe not having a job for a couple weeks, until I find another one. And that's the reality of visual effects. And I would warn anybody going into visual effects if to be prepared for that. I've had lots of friends that are very good in the industry that a show ended, the studio had no work right behind it, and they were let go. Again, that's just a part of this industry. Now, this goes back again, all the way back to the beginning of the conversation when Catherine was bringing up the contacts and relationships, because what ends up happening for a lot of these people that have this happen where they've lost a job because the studio doesn't have work right behind it. One, you might jump right back to that studio in a month. When a project comes up, they'll call you right back and say, hey, come work for 8 months, on something. Or you're in a position where you can reach out to a bunch of friends and say, hey, I'm available. And then 9 times out of 10, one of them is going to call back and say, yep, we could use it for 3 months, or we could use it for 6 months, or hey, we got a year project, kind of stuff. And so what ends up happening is the longer you work, the easier it is to get the work, right? And it's just because of contacts as much as anything else. Like, people in virtually every studio, because you may have worked with them at ILM or you may have worked with them at Weta, but then they went on and worked with another studio, and then you went there and did one gig. And as soon as you get there, 50 other people, right? And it's like, and that just kind of grows. And so that's why, to me, one of the most important things when you get into the visual effects industry, when you get your foot in the door, is the networking. And it sounds cliche, it sounds stupid. Everybody always says networking, networking, networking. It is the number one important thing, almost in some ways over your performance, because you're going to rely on that phone call or that email to a friend at a bunch of different points in your career, and I can attest for it for myself and even my friends who called me and said, hey, I want to come work at this studio. And all it is one phone call from me to somebody that says, this person's great, hire them, and it's done. And they skip that whole process, right? And it's not unfair. It's just anytime we're hiring at these studios, you're struggling to find the right people, right? And if somebody internally knows somebody's a good fit and they'll vouch for that, they're going to get the job 90% of the time. And it's just the way it is, because that diminishes the risk for me when I'm hiring. If I can go talk to one of my artists who's a friend with this person, and I can talk to them about them and say, hey, what are they good at? And I can get strengths and weaknesses and be like, hey, yeah, I think they're a good fit. Cool. It's similar to what I was saying, having references on your resume. It's like, I'm a reference guy, almost more than a demo reel, because to me, demo reels only show what you were able to do, what resources you were given to do your project, not what your potential is. And I can easily call an instructor at the academy and say, hey, what do you think about this? And them have seen potential, knowing that you had time restraints on something personal came up in your life and you couldn't work on the, couldn't devote, it's like, there's lots of variables in there, and you can cut through that crap really quick and get straight to the, hey, there's a lot of potential in this person, and I've seen it as their instructor, and you do it, or I saw it as a coworker, and to me, I'd much rather hire that route, than anywhere else. So.
Oh, such a great place to end, coming full circle. I can't tell you how much I appreciate, and we appreciate the time that you've taken out of your busy schedule. We know how busy you are.
Oh, good.
I'm sure you've touched a lot of people's lives just by giving your thoughts on the industry and your personal story. So thank you so much. I just want to give a shout out to our team, Becky Johnson, who is she's like the wind beneath our wings. She's like doing all this stuff to make these panels happen. Online education, who've been amazing to help moderate, to make these webinars happen. Will Ziegler, who is wonderful at summarizing the questions from the students and getting their answers. So again, thank you so much for your time. And we know that you have many more things to come, that we'll be keeping an eye on you and what you're doing. So thank you so much.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Like, I think we talked about it before. It's, I had a lot of help in my career. I would love to say that I was just this amazing talent and that was all it was. No. I had lots of help in my career, and a lot of that came from the academy. And it goes with the instructors, the friends I made there, that, again, are now colleagues. I mean, I think we talked about it the other day. Of that core group of us that we used to work our butts off, everybody's done great things in the industry, including another VFX supervisor that I'm partnered with at Weta Digital, Pavni Rao. She sat right there. We still laugh about it to this day, like working on projects till 2 a.m. kind of stuff. So it's she's another VFX supervisor on Avatar, and so it's just like there's a lot of us that had really great opportunities and relationships built there. And so anything I can do to help out.
Well, thanks for giving back, because we appreciate it, and wish you all the success in the future, and can't wait till the new avatars come out.
Yeah, me neither. I've been on this Avatar 2 for 4 years, so that's how long it takes to make these movies. And I've got 1.5 years left before you see the first sequel. But I can tell you, we have a bunch of finals, and it's gonna look really good. So people are gonna like it.
Can't wait.
Put on your scuba gear when you go to the theater. So.
Yeah. Take care. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.